On the morning of June 28, 1914, an assassin threw a grenade at a royal motorcade and missed. The Archduke survived. The plot had failed. The conspirators began to scatter. One of them, a 19-year-old boy, was so ashamed that he swallowed a cyanide capsule and jumped into a river. The cyanide didn't work. The river was 4 inches deep. And yet, within the hour, that same teenager, sitting outside a sandwich shop, heartbroken and directionless, would fire 2 shots that ended the lives of over 20 million people. This wasn't fate. This wasn't destiny. This was a string of catastrophic accidents, engineered in part by a secret military organization so dangerous that its own government tried to erase it from history. You're about to hear the story they never finished telling you in school. To understand what happened on that street in Sarajevo, you need to understand what Europe actually was in 1914. It was a powder keg, and everyone knew it. 6 major powers, Britain, France, Russia, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, had spent decades locking themselves into military alliances so rigid, so automatic, that a single act of violence anywhere on the continent could legally obligate millions of men to march to war. They called it a balance of power. What they'd actually built was a doomsday machine. At the center of the tension, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a crumbling, multi-ethnic giant desperately trying to hold itself together. And the one territory it could not afford to lose was the Balkans, specifically Bosnia-Herzegovina, a region it had formally annexed in 1908 over the furious objections of the neighboring Kingdom of Serbia. Serbia wanted the Balkans united under Slavic identity. Austria-Hungary wanted Serbia contained. And simmering beneath both governments, operating in the shadows, was a network of ultranationalist operatives who believed that diplomacy was weakness, and that only blood could redraw the map. That network had a name, Ujedinjenje ili SMRT, Union or Death. The world would come to know them as the Black Hand, and they had a plan for June 28th. The Black Hand was founded in 1911 by a Serbian army intelligence officer named Dragutin Dimitrijevic, known by his operative codename, Apis. The organization's membership was secret, its methods were violent, and its goal was singular: liberate all South Slav peoples from Austro-Hungarian control, by any means necessary. By early 1914, Apis had identified a target of extraordinary symbolic value. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was scheduled to visit Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. The date was not incidental. June 28th was Vidovdan, St. Vitus Day, the most sacred date in Serbian national memory. The anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. To the Serbian nationalist movement, scheduling a royal visit on that date wasn't diplomacy. It was a provocation. Apis recruited a cell of young Bosnian nationalists, most of them teenagers, most of them dying of tuberculosis, most of them with nothing to lose. He equipped them with 4 FN Model 1910 pistols, 6 hand grenades, and cyanide capsules to swallow if captured. He had them smuggled across the Serbian border into Bosnia through a network of sympathizers. There were 7 conspirators in total. They positioned themselves along the Apelquay, the main route of the Archduke's motorcade, each one responsible for a different point along the road. The morning of June 28th was warm and clear. Flags lined the streets. Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie, rode in an open-top Graf and stiff touring car, waving at crowds. Security was, by modern standards, almost non-existent. The Austro-Hungarian authorities had received warnings. They had been largely ignored. At approximately 10:10 in the morning, the motorcade passed the first conspirator. He froze, did nothing. The second conspirator, Nedeljko Kabranovic, did not freeze. Kabranovic hurled his grenade directly at the Archduke's car. The driver saw it coming. He accelerated. The grenade struck the folded convertible roof, bounced off, and detonated beneath the following vehicle, wounding 2 officers and several bystanders. Franz Ferdinand was unharmed. Kabranovic swallowed his cyanide and leapt into the Miljacka River. The cyanide, which had apparently degraded, made him violently ill. The river was barely ankle-deep. He was arrested within seconds, vomiting on the riverbank. The motorcade sped to City Hall. The remaining conspirators, rattled, exposed, certain the mission was blown, began to dissolve into the crowd. Among them, a 19-year-old student named Gavrilo Princip. He walked to a nearby delicatessen, Schiller's, and stood outside, processing his failure. The Archduke completed his reception at City Hall. He was furious about the grenade. He insisted on changing the route to visit the wounded officers in hospital. His aide-de-camp, General Oskar Podierek, agreed. What happened next is one of the most consequential navigational errors in human history. The lead driver was not informed of the route change. He turned onto Franz Josef Street, the original route, by mistake. General Podierek corrected him. The driver stopped the car to reverse. He stopped directly in front of Schiller's delicatessen. Gavrilo Princip was standing 5 feet away. Seen a narrow street, a frozen moment, the car, the young man, the space between them almost nothing. Princip drew his pistol. He fired twice. The first bullet struck the Archduke in the jugular vein. The second struck Sophie in the abdomen. Both were dead within the hour. Princip tried to swallow his cyanide. It failed again. He was beaten by the crowd, arrested, and taken into custody. He was too young, by Austro-Hungarian law, to be executed. He would die in prison of tuberculosis in 1918. He was 23 years old. The war that followed killed an estimated 17 to 20 million people. It redrew the map of the world, collapsed four empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, the Russian, the German, and created the political vacuum that would, within 20 years, give rise to Adolf Hitler. All of that is documented history. But the story of the Black Hand has a final, darker chapter. Apis, Colonel Dragutin Dimitrijevic, survived the war's opening years. But in 1917, the Serbian government, now operating in exile after Austrian occupation, put him on trial. The charge was conspiracy to assassinate the Serbian crown prince. Most historians today believe the charge was fabricated. What the government actually wanted, what they desperately needed, was to bury his connection to Sarajevo, to sever, officially, any link between the Serbian state and the killing of Franz Ferdinand. They were negotiating with the Allied powers. They needed clean hands. Apis was convicted on the manufacture charge. He was executed by firing squad in June 1917. Before he died, he reportedly stated, and this is documented in surviving Serbian records, though their full authenticity remains debated, that he accepted that his work in Sarajevo had been a catastrophic miscalculation, that he had believed a symbolic act would force a diplomatic reckoning. He had not anticipated the machine it would set in motion. The other surviving conspirators were held in harsh Austro-Hungarian prisons. Several died of tuberculosis before the war ended. Those who survived were quietly released after the armistice and largely returned to obscurity. Sarajevo itself, the Latin bridge where the final shots were fired, still stands. For decades under Yugoslav communist rule, Princip was celebrated as a hero, a revolutionary, a liberator. After the breakup of Yugoslavia, the narrative inverted. He became a terrorist, a murderer, a boy whose moment of action, accidental as it was, stained a century. And the question that historians still argue about, that has never been fully, satisfactorily resolved, is this. Could anyone have stopped it? The warnings were there. The alliances were known. The Black Hand was not invisible. Multiple intelligence services across Europe had pieces of the picture. And yet the machine ran. Every actor, every government, every general, every diplomat made choices in those 37 days that seemed locally rational and were collectively catastrophic. That is perhaps the most disturbing legacy of Sarajevo. Not that a teenager with a pistol started a world war, but that the world had built a system so brittle, so automated, that almost anyone, with almost any act, could have done the same. "20 million people for collapsed empires, a century of consequences, from a wrong turn, a degraded cyanide capsule, and a 19-year-old boy standing outside a sandwich shop." Here's what I want you to sit with tonight. The Black Hand believed one violent act would prevent a war by forcing a political confrontation before a larger conflict became inevitable. They weren't trying to destroy the world. They thought they were saving something. How many other moments in history, moments we call turning points, were actually accidents, miscalculations, or plans that went catastrophically sideways? Leave your answer in the comments. And if there's a crime, a conspiracy, or a buried chapter of history you think Tainted Century should expose next, you know where to find us. At Tainted Century.